is the international virtual learning series with the blessing of Almighty founder Kalvivalal Devathirti Kalasalingam Ayya, with the support of our Sridharan sir. 6 series on treatment update uh,
ఇప్పుడు మా నిమిషం కలిసి
in association with the Indian Pharmaceutical Association, South Tamil Nadu local branch, head of Kalasalingam College of Pharmacy. Proud to have an eminent personality, well-known, undisputed researcher, and honorable resource person, Professor Dr.Radhika V. Kumar, School of Pharmacy, University of Health Sciences. US is honored to have with us for this occasion. We thank you for kindly being the valuable part of this, and let me acquaint you with the sterling quality of this eminent personality, who is a brilliant academician and researcher. Madam, your motivation and inspiration for our student. Madam, we are fully appreciate you for finding the time to be with us. Most welcome, Professor. Most welcome you, Madam.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. Next, I welcome all members for today's session. It is gratifying to note that this session covers a wide range of interesting topics for COVID-19. So I hope this session will be a good platform for our students. Dear students, kindly utilize this great opportunity. This is the first and foremost needed for your career. All the very best, my dear students. Kindly continue your session, madam.
Madam, you can proceed, madam.
Please, thank you, madam. You can proceed.
Yeah, can you see my slides?
Yes, madam.
Yeah, okay. All right. Is it in the slideshow mode, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Thank you, Dr. Venkatesan and the school for inviting me for a talk. And in this time of pandemic, of the most hot and resorted topic, basically, which is COVID-19, which is not only gripping India, but it is also gripping everybody worldwide. And still there are, we are still searching for a lot of answers regarding this particular pandemic that has like struck us so badly that, it's we're still trying to find answers. So this is a small effort in the direction of COVID-19. I'm sure many of you are already aware of, have been, reading up sources, updating yourself, and trying to find out what's going on, how is this disease caused, or, what are the possible treatments. Today, suddenly they say, oh, this particular drug is amazing. Tomorrow they say, no, this is not okay, things like that. So basically, we're still searching for answers. So this presentation is just to give you an update on what is going on out there, okay? And a little bit of brief update on what is COVID-19 and some forms of drugs that are available. So before I move on, I'll also like to give you a little bit of background about myself.
Say,
That,
oh, this particular drug is amazing.
I did my
they say, no,
pharmacy
this
from
is not
India,
okay.
and things like that. From Bombay University, now called Mumbai, very rightfully. And I moved on to pursue my master's and PhD in the United States of America. And pretty much like I did my, what do you call it? I did my PhD in the area of medicinal chemistry. Okay, so don't get very startled. The reason I took up chemistry is because I wanted to write less. That's all. I didn't want to write big, long essays or something of that sort. So I found chemistry is very easy because you just had to make structures and then, explain the whole thing out. Okay. Probably I could like attribute it to my genetics as well, a little bit. But, yeah, and then, moved on and I realized that academia is my, area of interest. I love the people interaction. I love the, interaction with the students over here. Although here it's a little different perspective as compared to India. India, it's more like, I think it's more clinical. It's more, formulation oriented and stuff like that. Here it's more, you have an infrastructure for research. So that's why, medicinal chemistry, when I pursued it, I did have that infrastructure to pursue what I really like to do. So this is a small effort in that direction. I've tried to incorporate some medchem components. Hopefully, your pharmacy students will, if they've been introduced to medicinal chemistry, they'll try and understand a little bit about it. So without any further delay, I would just like to start with the topic that I have been assigned to, which is COVID-19 and what are the treatment updates. So we'll be slowly going over some of the drugs that have been used and their, what were their processes of their clinical trials and so on and so forth. All right. Okay. So just starting with a brief introduction. So, so what is COVID-19? And it's basically what is coronavirus, as everybody calls it. It's an envelope positive strength single-stranded RNA beta coronavirus of the family Coronaviridae. All right, and this particular virus, because I'm not a virologist, so I don't want to go into the details of that, but it's basically it's coming from a family of Coronaviridae, which is also the the family of some mild cold viruses like HCOV OC43, HKU 229E. All right. But this particular form has been found to be highly pathogenic. But before this also, there have been some pathogenic forms that have been out there, which is, for example, it's not many years ago, as I would say, the SARS virus, which kind of engulfed the world in 2002-2003 with 8,000 cases worldwide, had a death rate of approximately 10%, while the MERS-CoV in 2012, which caused around 2,500 confirmed cases and a fatality rate of 36%, also belongs to the same family virus. All right, thank you. All right, so what really happens in this particular infection is that it's an infectious disease, all right, and it basically leads to acute respiratory distress syndrome. So basically affecting the respiratory system, leading to long-term reduction in lung function, arrhythmia, and finally death. Okay, so it was basically found to affect the respiratory system. That's how this whole thing started off. Okay, now without any further delay, what are the treatment options that we have as of now? So the first drug that came out, I think, or the second drug, I believe, not the first one, but the first, this was one of the drugs that really came out in the open, and there was a big, hula hoo about it, that Remdesivir. Okay, so as you can see, I put up the structure for you right on the right side. At the corner is the structure of Remdesivir. Okay, and it basically, if you look at the structure of remdesivir, it is an ATP competitive inhibitor. That means it basically competes with ATP. All right, that's the mechanism of action of this drug. And it's a broad spectrum drug against several RNA viruses. So, so before the drugs that I wanted to, really stress on, I think I forgot one of the points is that uh, I know this virus is constantly changing its course or its strain, and so therefore it's becoming increasingly difficult to design drugs or to kind of make the drug or identify, oh, this component of the virus is what is steady and we can design the molecule accordingly. But that's becoming increasingly difficult. So, and with the cost involved in making a drug and getting it through clinical trials, and then it's a long process. It takes about 15 years and a lot of money to actually bring one drug into the market. Okay, and it's really sad to see that these drugs can get pulled out eventually as well. Just one bad thing, and these drugs are pulled out of the market. So, so nowadays there's a new strategy, or more recently, companies or researchers have started the idea of repurposing drugs. That means drugs that have been used for some other purpose have been repurposed and used for some other reason. So repurposing drugs, kind of one of the main reasons of doing that is for cost effectiveness. All right. So remdesivir is one of these drugs, which basically is already there in the market, and it's been a broad spectrum drug for various RNA viruses. Okay. Second thing is, if you guys have a little bit of medicinal chemistry background, for those of you who have been introduced, you guys know that it's a prodrug. Okay, so prodrug means it's an inactive form of a drug, and it needs activation in order to do its activity. All right. And then how does it work? It's actually an ATP mimic. All right. So the way it's an ATP mimic is you can actually see that phosphate group out there, and adenosine triphosphate, that's ATP. So this whole molecule more or less resembles or mimics the ATP. All right. So what you can say is it's an ATP competitive inhibitor. That means it competes with ATP for the enzyme. All right. And the enzyme that it basically works on is the RNA polymerase. Okay. So the RNA polymerase is very important, especially during the RNA synthesis of the virus, because this particular drug basically mimics the ATP that is responsible for to go and bind to the enzyme, and then a lot of downstream signaling pathways. So it's called as an ATP competitive inhibitor. All right. And then what it does is it blocks the ATP from binding to the site, and therefore the ATP cannot bind. As the ATP cannot bind, the drug binds, it blocks the enzyme, and then the function of the enzyme is stopped. Okay. And therefore it kills the virus. That's the way it acts. Okay. It does not act as a classic chain terminator. That means it does not right away stop the polymerase reaction. It takes a while for it, or somewhere downstream after 2 or 3 steps, it stops the elongation or the replication of that chain. Okay. All right. Now there is delayed chain termination as compared to another drug that belongs to the same class, which is entecavir. Okay. Now it has been found this drug is a repurposed drug. So it has been found that when it works on, it was tried on other viruses as well. Like for example, it was tried on Ebola, and it was found that the selectivity of ATP versus remdesivir was 4-1. Whereas in case of RSV, RNA dependent, it was 3-1. And in human mitochondrial RNA polymerase, the selectivity is 500-1. So that means it says that it's highly selective for the RNA virus. All right. So it could be used as a potential because of this wide ratio difference. You can use it more towards or more selectively towards the targeting of the virus. Okay. Again, some structural features that I would like to point out is that if you look at this structure, it basically resembles that of ATP. So whatever, if you can recollect this, structure of ATP, you can see that there is a hydroxy group. And what is the importance of this hydroxy group? So this hydroxy group is important for the synthesis of RNA DNA. So the regular ATP, this hydroxy group is very important. All right, and this hydroxy group is important for during the synthesis of the RNA. The cyano group, as you can see, that's number 4 out here. What does it do? The cyano group is a very, as you know, cyano is a very, what do you call it? A very potent group. And it's basically the part which is a surprise element to this particular structure. And it's involved in the inhibition of the polymerase. Okay. Now, in this case, as you can see, this is the adenosine moiety. That's the part that mimics the adenosine. So these two nitrogens, all right, they are involved in binding interactions with the enzyme, all right. And therefore, if you know about these binding interactions, there are different types of binding interactions like hydrogen bonding, what do you call it, ionic bonding, and, you have other types of bondings like ion dipole, dipole, etc. So these nitrogens basically act as donor acceptors and therefore form important bonds with the enzyme. Then this particular piece, which is called as, it's kind of like a glycosidic bond, like in the sugars, you see a glycosidic bond. So number 3, the structural feature is this carbon-carbon glycosidic bond between the adenine moiety and the ribose sugar moiety. So this is typically mimicking the ribose sugar, all right, because these are all nucleotides, okay. So this ribose sugar, this carbon-carbon bond gives a special stability to the structure, okay, and probably makes it very resistant to enzyme degradation. So that gives stability to this entire molecule. And finally, piece number 5, which is the phosphate group. And that phosphate group is essential because I just spoke about it, and we know that remdesivir is an ATP mimic. That means you need to have that phosphate component, okay? So these are some structural features of remdesivir. Now, what was done in order to bring it in, when they had to expedite this particular drug? So what were the clinical trials done? So they used a compassionate use program. And what did they do in this case? They hospitalized patients with severe COVID-19 who were enrolled in a 10-day course of IV intravenous remdesivir in a compassionate use program. And it was found that in 68% patients, there was clinical improvement. In 57% patients who were mechanically ventilated, they were successfully extubated. And in 18% patients who required ventilation, there was mortality seen, or these people did not survive. All right. So there are different types of studies that are done. So another one is, it's called as a double-blind study. All right. Okay. So when double-blind study is, the examiner and the observer, they both don't know what's happening, and there's a placebo-controlled trial. In this case, it was seen that when it was randomized 2:1 patients with severe COVID-19 infection, they received a 10-day course of intravenous or IV remdesivir. And but the problem here was, when they did a double-blind study, it was lower enrollment, and they could not really significantly see the difference between remdesivir and the placebo effect. Okay. Now, in the randomized double-blind also, they saw that basically 31%, all right, the remdesivir group, or 31% of the patients, they had a faster time to recovery than those who were placed on placebo, okay, right, with a median time recovery of 11 days in the remdesivir group compared to 15 days in the placebo group. All right, and there was a slight survival benefit associated with the mortality rate by day 14. Okay. Now, in case of a randomized uncontrolled phase 3 trial, it was a 5-day trial versus a 10-day course. So, the patients were treated with 5-day versus 10 days. So some of the patients on a 5-day, and then, some of the patients on a 10-day. But there were no differences in the outcome seen in this group. But somehow, because of this whole pandemic and the whole thing, because you had to have something in the market, on May 1st, this particular drug was approved by the FDA for emergency use authorization for Remdesivir for the treatment of COVID-19. Okay, so it was like, because there was nothing in the market and there was such a high mortality rate going on, they went ahead and approved this drug for use. Again, there are a lot of answers to these drugs that need to be answered, but because it has been shown to show some effect, they expedited its approval. All right, now, so the suggested dosing. So basically, if you are giving this particular drug, how is the dose of this drug given to the patients? Okay, so for adults and pediatric patients, how was the drug? So those who require mechanical ventilation, there was a single loading dose of 200 milligrams intravenous over 30 to 120 minutes on day 1. And then once daily, a maintenance dose of 100 milligrams was given over 30 to 120 minutes for 9 days from days 2 through 10. Okay. For those patients who did not require mechanical ventilation, a single dose of 200 milligrams of IV over 30 to 120 minutes on day 1. And then once daily, again, 30 to 120 minutes for 4 days. Okay. And then if the patient does not demonstrate any clinical improvement, the treatment was extended for about 5 additional days. So this is how the treatment regimen of this particular drug was decided. All right. Now, in case of pediatric patients, so when they saw children are also being affected. So in case of pediatric patients where the body weight, so most of these drugs, what you need to understand is it's basically, since they're given IV, these drugs are calculated as per body weight. Okay. All right. Basically, they have to know the body weight of the patient and then adjust the dose accordingly. It's not like taking an oral pill wherein you just take, say, for example, Crocin or any other drug that you take, which has a very defined dose. Okay, because you're talking about intravenous administration. So intravenous administration means the drug is directly going into your bloodstream, and because it's directly going into your bloodstream, overdose or underdosing is always a problem, and you need to be very particular about it. And body weight is one of the factors that is considered while calculating these doses. Okay, now, so those that require, so for the kids who require invasive mechanical ventilation, there is a single loading dose. So you can see that for the children, the drug concentration kind of goes down. 5 milligrams per kg on day 1, followed by 2.5 milligrams per kg for 9 days. Those kids or the infants who don't require mechanical ventilation, 5 milligrams per kg on day 1, then 2.5 milligrams per kg for 4 days. And if there is no clinical improvement, then you continue giving the same treatment for another 5 days. Okay, so the treatment regimen varies depending upon whom you're trying to treat, whether you're trying to treat an adult or you're trying to treat a child. Okay, but obviously, if a drug has some pros, that means if it has some positive effects, it also has some negative effects as well. All right. So ADRs basically means what are the adverse drug reactions and what are the contraindications. That means when should this drug not be used, or in what situations this drug not be used. Okay, so the contraindications are, obviously everybody likes to paint a very nice picture, and the contraindications don't show up until the reports are being done, okay, by the patients or by the hospitals or whoever is collecting this information. So any kind of allergy that, obviously allergy is one thing. You may not know if you have an allergy to this particular drug until the allergic reactions manifest. Okay. Then alanine aminotransferase or aspartate aminotransferase greater than 5 times upper limit than normal. Okay. Then estimated GFR, that means the kidney filtration rate is less than 30 ml per minute or required dialysis. Obviously, most of the drugs are contraindicated in pregnancy, so it should not be used if the woman is expecting or she's breastfeeding. What are the adverse effects of this drug? Apparently, it elevates hepatic aminotransferase levels. It causes hematochezia, nausea, and vomiting. Okay, so these are some adverse effects. The next class of drugs, so that was all about remdesivir. The next class of drugs are called as the IL-6 inhibitors. So what are these IL-6? IL stands for interleukin, and there are different types of interleukins, and basically this class is called as the IL-6 inhibitors. What is so good about these IL-6 inhibitors? So what is its importance in COVID-19? Let's check. Okay, so whenever there is an inflammation, all right, okay, hyperinflammation, that means there is some kind. So these interleukins are basically cytokines, and cytokines are released in response to inflammation. So whenever there is an injury to the body, there is a release of these inflammatory cytokines. So interleukins are a class of inflammatory cytokines. So in case of hyperinflammation, it's seen that these levels of these proteins kind of go up. So there is an increased C-reactive protein. All right, there is increased levels of ferritin. Ferritin is a protein that's basically involved in iron. Like ferritin, the very word says it has something to do with iron. All right, lactate dehydrogenase, all right, D-dimer, and pro-inflammatory cytokines. So basically what we are inching towards is when there is a hyperinflammation, there is an increase in the level of these pro-inflammatory cytokines, especially IL-6. All right. And when there is an increase in the level of pro-inflammatory cytokines, it leads to all the respiratory related problems, which is acute respiratory distress syndrome, respiratory failure, multi-organ dysfunction, eventually leading to death, which is also seen in the case of COVID-19. So therefore, it was found that, or it was not found, basically it was suggested, or it was kind of, inferred upon, that if you can inhibit these pro-inflammatory cytokines, especially if you use antagonists or inhibitors towards these pro-inflammatory cytokines like IL-6, you may be able to target COVID-19. Okay, all right. So let's see. What drug? So when you talk about these interleukins, so the drug's name is called as tocilizumab. All right. The very word mab says that it's a monoclonal antibody. Okay. So it's a monoclonal antibody, which is also belonging to the class of a biological response modifier. All right. It's also called, and it's a biological response modifier. Basically, by recombinant DNA technology, this particular drug is synthesized. It's an immunosuppressive drug, and it binds to IL-6R. Okay. All right. It was initially also used as, again, this is a repurposed drug, and it was also used as a disease modifying anti-rheumatic drug. So that is the DMARD that you can see. All right, it was used as a DMARD, which is an anti-rheumatic drug. Okay, all right. So it's basically a recombinant humanized immunoglobulin. It's a monoclonal antibody. And how do you identify this? How do you identify if it's a monoclonal antibody? It ends with these three letters, NAB, which basically stands for monoclonal antibody. And it's very specific for interleukin 6. Okay, all right. And so basically, this particular drug was initially used for rheumatoid arthritis, which is an autoimmune disorder. And this autoimmune disorder has seen high levels of IL-6. So repurposing this drug in the case of COVID-19 was also thought to be another, another way that you could combat basically COVID-19, because the IL-6 levels go high in COVID-19. Okay, so what are the warnings? So you can have some serious infections, basically some fatal infections, including TB. All right, bacterial and viral infections, invasive fungal infections, and other opportunistic infections were also reported. You have to carefully consider the risks and benefits to initiate this particular therapy with infections. So those who have, the patients who have prior infections, you should be very careful, and you should be able to modify the treatment accordingly. Okay, and then close monitoring of the patients is also needed, especially including active, those who face in those with a negative tuberculin skin test during and after treatment. Okay, if a serious infection develops, then you need to discontinue this particular therapy. All right, so that's one of the things that, especially if a person has a history of TB or if a person is suffering from TB, then this drug needs to be very closely monitored. All right. Now in clinical trials, so obviously before this drug, was already being used for RA, that is rheumatoid arthritis, but obviously it has to go through a series of protocols before it's approved for COVID-19. So basically, how did they, speed this process, or how did they, see that this particular drug may be a potential for the use for the treatment? Is they basically what they did is they basically, in China, which was the epicenter of this particular outbreak, this particular drug can be used to severely or critically treat COVID-19 patients with extensive lung lesions and high levels of IL-6 too. All right, but so here there is a governing body which is called as NIH, which is called as National Institutes of Health, which basically removed some treatment guidelines, or came out with some treatment guidelines for this particular infection. And it says that there is insufficient clinical data to recommend either for or against the use in the treatment. So this is one of the deterring factors. That means they don't have enough of data to support that this particular drug is actually playing a very important role in basically COVID-19 measurements. So it's basically demanding further study before it can actually go into being used as a drug, or a potential candidate for the treatment of COVID-19. Okay, some simpler drugs which have been in the market for a very long time, since it's mostly, most of the things seen is with the respiratory system, and there is inflammation involved. So steroids are classic examples which can be used for treatment of inflammation. All right, and one of the drugs which are commonly used is dexamethasone. And dexamethasone is basically used, when patients have severe respiratory symptoms. It's actually a GR agonist. So the GR agonist basically stands for glucocorticoid receptor agonist. All right. Okay. And what does this do? So as the structure is right here, it basically has a steroidal backbone. So you see these 4 fused rings, and then you see this extension out here. It basically resembles that of an androstane or a steroid backbone. All right. So dexamethasone is a steroid. What does it do? It binds to the glucocorticoid receptor, and it inhibits. So when there is an endogenous substance that binds to the glucocorticoid, it releases these pro-inflammatory signals. So, or it inhibits this pro-inflammatory signal. So dexamethasone acts as an agonist to the glucocorticoid receptor and inhibits the pro-inflammatory signals. All right. So when it inhibits the pro-inflammatory signals, that means it's anti-inflammation. All right. So that's why this drug is thought to be useful, in order to reduce the inflammation, and especially because COVID is associated with respiratory symptoms. So therefore, it may be a potential candidate for, kind of relieving, if not the treatment part, but it can also probably symptomatically relieve COVID-19. Okay. Then the next drug is prednisolone, which is also a steroid. So if you can go back and check, so it's basically the same family. It's a steroidal backbone in case of dexamethasone. All right. And in case of prednisolone, it's right here, the chain. All right. It's slightly different. So prednisolone also has been tried, but there is a retrospective study. All right. So what they have done is they have 201 patients with confirmed COVID-19 associated pneumonia, is also an infection of the respiratory system, who developed ARDS, that is acute respiratory distress syndrome. It reduces the mortality, is what it was seen. All right. And it was seen that 46% patients died, while those who did not receive methylprednisolone, 61% died. Okay. So it's important that, this particular drug, a single-centered study was done, okay, and then it was seen that there were improved clinical symptoms and it shortened the disease course in patients who received the drug versus who did not receive the drug. So again, this particular drug is not to treat the cause of, the actual cause. It's not affecting the cause of the virus, but it is actually more focused, or it is more, it's like an adjuvant therapy more to relieve the symptoms associated with COVID-19. Okay, so it's more symptomatic. All right. Now, it is seen that basically the results are still in progress, that some of these results are still being it's still being in clinical trials, okay, and it has been initiated in various countries for the use of methylprednisolone for pneumonia or severe acute respiratory syndrome. So this is one of the drugs that is being kind of looked upon for COVID-19 treatments as well. Okay, so the dosage that was used was 1 to 2 milligrams per kg. IV, again, this particular drug is given, and it's given for 5 to 7 days. And the last drug, which is like the one that really created a lot of waves in the news, is hydroxychloroquine. Okay, so when this particular drug came, I think there was a lot of discussion on this particular drug, whether it should be or it should not be used. So what is the way that actually, so before actually seeing why this drug is used in, or why this drug was suddenly used for the treatment of COVID-19, we need to understand what does this drug really do. Okay, so as you can see the structure of the drug, hydroxychloroquine, it was basically, this particular drug is, the very word chloroquine basically says it belongs to the anti-malarial class of drugs. Okay, and how does it do? It's basically, it was found that in the malarial parasite, all right, what does it do is, this particular drug, it accumulates in the lysosomes of the malarial parasite, and when it accumulates in the lysosome of the malarial parasite, so the lysosomes are basically having an acidic pH. Okay, now when the hydroxychloroquine goes into these lysosomes, it tends to increase the pH. All right, and when it increases the pH, then it interferes with the parasite's ability to proteolyze hemoglobin, and thereby preventing normal growth and replication of the parasite. So basically what it does is, by increasing the pH, so lysosomes are needed, and then they are very important organelles for the parasite, and by increasing the pH, that means you're converting an acidic pH to a basic pH. So by raising the pH, you're basically compromising the function of the parasite. And when you compromise the function of the parasite, obviously the parasite dies. Okay, so that's how it was used initially. And it also, it basically interferes with heme polymerase. Okay, all right. And then this particular drug, when it accumulates in human organelles, all right, it also raises the pH. All right, it was also found that when this particular drug accumulates in the human organelles, it raises the pH, which inhibits antigen processing, prevents alpha-beta chains of major histocompatibility complex. So that is this here, MHC. It basically inhibits the antigen processing, preventing alpha-beta chains of MHC class 2 from dimerizing. So what does that prevention do? It inhibits antigen presentation of the cell and reduces the inflammatory response. So therefore, what it does is, it somehow it complexes with this MHC, and then it reduces the inflammatory response. Okay, so that's how hydroxychloroquine is shown to have its effect. All right, but with hydroxychloroquine, all right, there has been a lot of buzz going on, whether to use it or whether not to use it. Okay, and it was seen that if this particular drug is used along with azithromycin, all right, it needs to be done with caution. The reason is because hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin, they have a direct effect on the heart. And what do they have an effect on the heart of? They basically prolong the QT. So if you've ever seen an EKG of a heart, you know that there is a PQRST signal, right? So it basically causes QT elongation, all right? And if there is a QT prolongation, then it is kind of a little problematic, because when there is a QT elongation, it can lead to cardiac arrhythmias, which is not good. So therefore, this particular drug is basically involved in prolongation of QT interval, and that can lead to cardiac arrhythmias, and the cardiac arrhythmias obviously can lead to bad consequences. So therefore, that's one of the major drawbacks of this particular drug. The next drug, which is being currently studied, or it's still up in clinical trials, is ivermectin. Ivermectin is a drug that's derived from a bacteria, Streptomyces avermitilis. And what does it do? Its mechanism of action is inhibiting the nuclear import of host and viral proteins. However, pharmacokinetic modeling predicts that, okay, these plasma concentrations attained with dosages up to 10 times higher than usual dosage also are substantially lower than concentrations associated with in vitro. So what is happening is somehow the data is kind of not matching, basically. What they're saying is when it was tested in, the pharmacokinetic testing was done, the dose that was used was much lower than compared to what the in vitro inhibition that they saw. So therefore, some further studies needs to be done in order to confirm that this particular drug is safe to use. Okay, so to give you a little background on ivermectin, ivermectin is basically a drug that kills by interfering with the nervous system of the muscle function. Okay, particularly by enhancing inhibitory neurotransmission. Okay, this drug, what it does is it binds to the glutamate gated chloride channels, all right? And then it basically causes increased permeability to chloride ions, causing hyperpolarization, eventually leading to paralysis and death. All right, so that's how this particular drug acts. And the last one, which is which is also something that's the latest thing, right, which is convalescent plasma. All right, so what is convalescent plasma? Convalescent plasma is basically, it's the plasma that contains antibodies to severe. So basically, if I suffer from a particular infection, then my plasma is capable of developing antibodies. So I can donate my plasma to somebody else who does not have those antibodies, and the person has the antigen in themselves. They can use these external antibodies and then fight the particular infection. So that's the whole concept of convalescent plasma. Okay, and that's being lately studied. It was also studied during the SARS epidemic. It was studied during the influenza epidemic. It was also studied during the MERS-CoV epidemic. All right. But however, studies again are still on in order to ensure that it's a potential treatment for COVID-19. So with that, that's all that ends from me. I hope you guys are keeping safe, social distancing, and with this new era of switching to online, I hope you guys are adapting well, and I still hope you guys recover well from, everybody kind of recovers fast and easy from this epidemic. Thank you for inviting me once again to this talk, and I'm open to any questions.
Thank you, madam. Dr. Radhika, madam. Thank you, madam.
Yeah.
Really, we had a informative and nice presentation. I hope this topic will motivate the students and encourage them in active learning in forthcoming days. Any questions from students? Any questions? Professor Anuraj, is there any chat box question? Any question? Anburaj? Anburaj sir, can you hear? Is there any chat box question?
Hello, sir. So I am Raghunath Pandey speaking, sir. Shall I ask one question, sir? Hello.
Yes, yes, I can hear you.
Excuse me, madam. Very nice presentation, madam. I had a question. Told that the dexamethasone is used for the patients who are affected with COVID-19 with high respiratory problem. But here, I myself is affected. But in the day one itself, when fever comes, here they are using dexamethasone injection. Is it right way of treatment, madam?
I think right
Before
now,
confirming,
uh-huh.
uh,
Please
yes, madam.
finish your question. I'm sorry I cut you off.
Madam, you are told that the dexamethasone steroid is used for the patients who are having high respiratory problems affected with COVID also. But here, in some hospitals, in the day one itself, the first day when fever comes, in that day itself, they are injecting dexamethasone. Is it
think
right way of treating?
I mean, I feel like right now everybody is hitting in the dark. They're coming up with whatever can first. So I think giving the dexamethasone is initially to take care of the symptoms associated. All right. So again, it's a virus, and you don't really have any antiviral. Virus is something that's basically the body kind of self fights the virus. Right. So maybe dexamethasone is given to relieve the symptoms, the respiratory inflammation that's involved, to clear off the passages. All right. So that the
Okay,
body can start building the immunity against the virus. All right. Okay.
okay,
Because there's
thank
no
you.
direct attack to the virus. Right. So basically, you're trying to treat the symptom and then, go after the virus later. That's what probably why they are giving dexamethasone.
Okay, okay, thank you, madam.
Well,
Any question?
Sir, there is a question in the text box by Dr. Tirupati Kumaresan, sir. How far hydroxychloroquine is effective against patients with morbidities?
I think studies are still under process. That's why I said most of these treatment options that are still here. That's a very nice question, actually. All right. So that the problem here is it's more like I said, it's all on a trial and basis error, and that's why the country is pushing, or all the countries are pushing forward to the uh, the what do you call it, the discovery of vaccine. Right. So right now, I think anything that's coming in the market which is shown to show slight effectiveness, they are trying to expedite it because it's all about life.
Okay, madam. There is another question by Dr. Jayanidhi, madam. The question is, madam, COVID-19 drugs should be given for how long period?
I think if you see, like I said, the body, it's a virus, right? So the virus, the body needs to fight it by itself. So I guess, like I said, what some of the treatment regimens that I discussed. So anywhere from, I think, 5 days to 10 days should be the treatment regimen. All right.
Okay.
Maybe longer depending upon the condition of the patient. All right. And then another thing is the dose parameter should be adjusted accordingly if the patient is depending on the age of the patient as well.
Okay, okay, madam. Thank you, madam.
Excuse me, madam. Excuse me, madam.
Yes.
Can you hear
Yes,
me?
yes, I can hear you.
Madam, I want to confirm that recently they are using low molecular weight heparin in many cases, particularly in India, and how it will be a potential therapy and how it will be helpful in preventing the fatality, madam.
My understanding of low molecular weight heparin is it's an anticoagulant, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, all right. I don't want to give any short explanation on this, but because maybe there are clotting factors involved, maybe possibility, but I don't want to give you an explanation on this and lead you to something wrong. So what I would like to do is maybe look it up because I really don't have much of an idea on LMWH. All right. All I know is it's an anticoagulant and it's used for some other reasons, but I can look it up and I can let you know for sure. Yeah. I
And
don't
whether
want to the wrong
and
way.
whether
Yeah.
this protocol is being followed in USA or only in India, ma'am?
I've not heard of LMWH.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay. I don't think it's being followed in the US. That's my understanding, LMWH yet. Yeah. I think there is another question from another student, I believe. It says, from COVID-19 patients, will the virus transmit to the others? I believe it's the contact time, right? So that's why they say that social distancing is important, wearing the mask is important. If you are asymptomatic and if somebody else is more prone to it, there is a certain lifespan of the virus when it gets transmitted from one person to another. But if it goes beyond that lifespan, that's something they are having a hard time confining, right? They're having a hard time to find out what is the survival time of this virus outside the body. Like, for example, what I would like to stress on is it's a virus, and it's a virus because it only has it thrives on the human body. All right. So anything outside it should not really thrive. But because with COVID, the problem is they are not able to find out. Okay, how what is the contact time that is involved in the virus. That's why they are not able to figure out. So that's why they are trying to nail that down as well. They have not been come down to the time span within which the virus spreads. Second thing is, when you are in a place with a high viral load, for example in hospitals or some open places where crowded places or something of that sort, if a person is even asymptomatic, the surface contact is much higher, and then the viral load is higher. So the chances of infection are much higher. I hope that answers the question that was in the chat box.
Yes, thank you, madam. Is anybody having question? You can either put it in the chat box or please unmute yourself and ask the question. Dear students or faculty members, if anybody have questions, kindly ask.
Okay, sir, leave it, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay, sir.
Madam, thank you, madam. On behalf of our management of Kalasalingam Group, hereby I express my wholehearted thanks to you and your esteemed management university for giving such a informative explanation and wonderful discussion. I hope this interaction will motivate the students and encourage them in active learning, madam. In future also, madam, excuse me, madam, can you hear?
Yeah, I'm listening. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In future also, let's have a good collaboration for the betterment and development of our students' career, madam.
Sure. Sure. Thank
Whenever
you for the
I,
opportunity. I'm really amazed to see that, when I did my B Pharmacy in India, we never had access to these kind of resources. And it's really amazing to see that with the technology moving forward and, things that have moved forward, you guys have made it possible to have these kind of online sessions and especially collaborating with, um, basically a lot of Indians abroad and trying to get them to talk to your students and motivate. And I can be, I'll be glad to be of any help and give you any kind of, consultation advice or any kind of guest lectures that you want me to be a part of in future. So, I'll be glad to do that because I was one of them. I can really associate myself with being one of them on the other side.
Thank you so much, madam. Another one more request, madam. Kindly let us know any of your friends, colleagues.
Sure.
Kindly refer, madam, who are able to guide and support in the development of our students' career, madam.
Definitely.
For our future webinar, madam.
Definitely keep in touch. We'll keep in touch, and as and when I come across and when the opportunity comes up, I'll be glad to help.